Today we're marking a very important day, which is the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Could you tell us, how important is this date, and then elaborate on, how probably we need someone like Kennedy again to bring back hope in this country?
Well, that's of course your opinion that we need another Kennedy. That's my opinion too. There are a lot of people who would not share that opinion though. So let us go back to that date and what I've learned since about the administration of John Kennedy. I was a very young person. I was not old enough to vote when he came into office. However, I campaigned for John F. Kennedy. I was living in Springfield, Massachusetts. I'm a Roman Catholic. This was our first Catholic president. He was young, charismatic, handsome, and he enjoyed some popular support. However, the country was very evenly divided at that time. It was divided for a couple of reasons. It was divided religiously in the first place. This is our first Catholic president. A lot of anti-Catholicism played itself out in that election. Secondly, he was handsome and young, probably the youngest candidate at that time. One of our youngest, if not the youngest president when he was elected. Very narrow victory. I was up for 3 days watching that election returns come in. Those were the days when they were hand-counted ballots. And he finally won. I say contentious because in the end, there are rumors that the vote was delivered to him in Illinois by a boss, I guess, the mayor of Chicago Daily. Anyway, when he came into office, he offered really hope in a miserable world. Beginning of the Cold War. It was an anti-communist movement, and it was fueled by the new institutions in our country, particularly the Central Intelligence Agency, which came into power in 1947, instituted in order to bring down and have regime change in the then communist USSR. By the time Kennedy came into power in 1961, he was caught in the middle of this Cold War, and he himself was rather a vicious Cold Warrior. During the campaign, he had pronounced threats against Cuba. He wanted the regime changed in Cuba to have a more friendly administration to the capitalist United States. Once he came into power, however, he began to really shift his opinion. He became more peaceful about Cuba and even about the Soviet Union. Eventually, our probably most anti-war president that we have had, determined to keep us out of war. I'm reading a whole book right now about the Kennedy years from what Bobby Kennedy, his brother and the AG in Washington in his administration, began to see as the two men took over power. What they began to see was that the powers in the U.S. government had been shifted, not to the president, but that the real powers behind the president and could control the president was now the Central Intelligence Agency and the military-industrial complex. Kennedy began then to shift his feelings to see that his main duty was to keep us out of war. That was the beginning of the war against Vietnam as well. So he began to see that his duty was to make peace, even with the communist powers. And he got in deep trouble about this. The Kennedy brothers began to see that the CIA was essentially unwilling to work with them, with the new president, or with Bobby, as they began to shift their feelings away from the Cold War and toward making peace with both the Soviet Union and with Cuba. This shift occurred after the invasion at the Bay of Pigs. That invasion in April 1961 at the Bay of Pigs in Cuba was a huge flop, and in which private armies that were funded by the U.S. largely and by the Cuban exile community in Miami, Florida, had said, we need air cover for this. We need airplanes to accompany these invaders. Kennedy refused to do that. Now, I'm not certain why he refused. He just had ultimate misgivings about the whole deal. Without that air cover, the invaders, many of them were captured by the Castro administration. Many of them were killed by the Castro administration, and it was an ultimate flop. That was the first kind of step in getting John Kennedy, in deep trouble with the military-industrial complex here and with the Central Intelligence. I'm very interested in keeping the issue of the John F. Kennedy assassination alive, because at the end of his administration, when he died, Robert Kennedy, his brother, came to the opinion that his brother had been assassinated not by forces abroad, but rogue forces within our own government. And he actually communicated that suspicion, according to this book, to a member, a Russian USSR citizen who had been in discussions over the years about establishing better relations between the United States and Russia. And Bob Kennedy communicated that suspicion, we'll put it that way, that John F. Kennedy had been killed not by Russia or communist forces or by Fidel Castro, but rather by rogue forces within our own government. That kind of back channel communication between the Kennedys and even Fidel Castro occurred throughout the presidency of John F. Kennedy, as he changed his mind, at least tried to change his mind, about making peace with the communist countries. Now, you asked a different question. Why do we need him today? Similar reasons. We need a president who is anxious to make peace with the rest of the world and not these continuous and relentless wars. If you are of the mind that this war in Ukraine is destroying the world and will destroy ultimately the United States, I believe, if you have investigated this war, if you have seen that much of this war, by many people, is a proxy war, again, between the United States and Russia, we need a president that will rethink that anti-Russia sentiment on the part of our establishment and begin to make peace and negotiate an end to this war. We need a president who might at least consider doing that, rather than our current leaders who are continuing to make war against Russia.